Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room. This is your host for the next 45 to 50 minutes, Pastor Mark. And by now, it's the day, a couple of days after Christmas, and hopefully you've recovered. And if not, hopefully tonight will help you have some perspective on what love is and what love is not. Tonight we're going to be talking about the prodigal son's older brother. And if you're not familiar with the story, it's in the book of Luke. A very interesting story about the older brother who basically had a real challenge with his younger brother, especially with what he did. I'm going to talk about this in probably greater detail than I did this last Sunday. I talked about it a little bit because I had 3 parables to talk about and what it meant to desire to find something that you have lost. Now, many of us this last week have had challenges with probably your in-laws, outlaws, relatives, or etc. Because it's the holidays and you're expected to do certain things and you're expected to do these things in a certain way. Well, unknown to you, there's a lot of, or maybe known to you, there's a lot of guilt going around that causes people to do things that they would normally maybe not do, and thinking that doing something extraordinary for Christmas or doing something outside the realm of normal creates an atmosphere of recovery or redemption, when the fact is that nothing's really needed in that realm except to love someone unconditionally. Now, I know that it's hard for some of us to wrap our head around that, but the fact is that it's really true. If we were to take all of the parables of what Jesus spoke about, it had everything to do with trying to show a class of people reacting a certain way. This is no exception. Because of the fact that Jesus is telling a story in a way that is really condescending, if you will, to those who were in charge, the Pharisees and Sadducees. We don't really understand that concept because we are not in America or in the U.S. or even here in lovely California. We are not subject to the rule of what's expected of you. Because if we were to have to follow that line, excuse me, we would find ourselves in a world of hurt. Now, first of all, I want you to get a background on this, and I'm going to lay out some things that actually are important in the fact that for you to see and read this parable, you have to, absolutely have to, take into account what's being said and why it's being representative. Now, in a family, especially this family, the family that we're about to talk about, the prodigal son's dad, was very affluent, had many slaves. He had many hired servants, if you will. We call them hired servants or bond slaves, but the fact is that they were given an opportunity to leave the household at a certain time, and because of their connection to the dad, they wanted to stay, and so they would stay as what they call hired servants. They were still owned, if you will, or responsibility of the father or the patriarch and it controlled their lives, every aspect of it. If they wanted to, they could have them dragged back if they tried to take off. But the point is that he did it, and he paid them something. This is the essence of what the prodigal son saw when he was returning, if you will, thinking that he was going to get his way. We're going to read it in a moment, and I'll explain some of this. The other thing that's important is that you need to understand that under Jewish law, the way things were set up, there was a hierarchy within the family. It was required, which is interesting because we're going to be talking about the prodigal son's older brother, who is basically a whiner. He's probably a snowflake in a lot of ways, and I use that term loosely. And a lot of weird things are going on within this family, but he had an obligation to do something in which he did not do, and I'll explain that also in just a moment, what he should have did when his younger brother asked to have his inheritance. Well, the younger brother was not guaranteed, nor should he have gotten any of the inheritance, because the older brother is the one that's in control of the whole thing. Once the father dies in a patriarchal system like in first century, when Jesus was there, what would happen is that the older son would have control of the dowry, or everything that was there. Everything that the father owned would come to him, and if he wanted to, he could give the younger son, his younger brother, some of it, half of it, or he could give him none of it. And that's just how that works. And unfortunately, in this situation, when the younger brother came to the father and demanded his inheritance, that didn't happen until after the dad passed or he died suddenly or whatever. Now, why does this all mean something? Is because basically what the younger son said to the dad, to his face, was, "I wish you were dead." And in doing that, he's opening the door for the older brother to step in. And his job at that point in time, according to many of the scholars, many of the Jewish writers of that time, said that what should have happened is that the older brother should have beat the pulp out of him, and I mean beat him until he couldn't stand, grab him by the back of the neck and throw him out of the house. He would actually walk him in front of everybody in God, and I'm talking about the whole town, by his hair, basically, and then throw him outside of the outskirts of town. I know that sounds harsh, but that's how it worked. The other thing that's interesting about this is that he finds that the father had a lot of money out there. In other words, he had probably loaned or had given, or some people hadn't repaid him yet, but over the whole town, what happens in this kind of an atmosphere is that dad, that patriarch, had a lot of people owe him money. So the younger brother, if tradition would hold, he would go and he would demand that those people pay his dad so that the inheritance could be split. That means he would get a bigger portion of that. There's also some other things that should have transpired. When this young man came to his father and said to him, "I wish you were dead, because I want my inheritance," the father should have stepped in and beat the pulp out of him and taken him to the edge of the town and basically thrown him over the edge, over the outside of the town, and basically said, "Don't come back to my house, you're not my son any longer." He should have been disowned. This is Jewish theology. This is how it works. Now, saying all of that, we're going to take a look at this story from a different perspective. We're going to look at it from the perspective of the older son and what transpired from the time that this young man came and asked his father for his inheritance. And we're going to look at that in light of the current events of what we call Christmas, the holidays, however you interpret what's going on around us today, with all of the chaos and all of the other stuff that goes with Christmas as we know it. It's very interesting to find that a lot of people do things out of tradition instead of out of the reason for the season, which is Jesus Christ. Now, following all of that, to say this, is that during this ministry, Jesus was making a point about the Pharisees and the Sadducees throughout this whole particular parable. Now, what do I mean by that? In the first of this trilogy, which is the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then the lost son. These three all have one thing in common, that they were talking about the Pharisees and Sadducees in the fact that they had completely abandoned the Jewish people for tradition and law. In other words, fulfilling the law, of which they could not do. At the time that Jesus came on the scene, after 400 years of silence, and the priests who basically did nothing but collect a paycheck and not really do anything to speak of, they were considered, at least in Jesus' eyes, as neglectful of the body of Christ. In other words, I say body of Christ, I'm going to just say the body of believers, Jewish believers. And in doing that, what he did and what happened was that he was condemning them, because basically he was said there was a father who owned everything, like he's very, very wealthy, and he had control over everything. And when the people, the Jewish people, walked away from the Pharisees and Sadducees, they let them go, but there was no reason for that. And he said, this is how it's supposed to be done. And he began to re-educate them through parables of how this was done. So if you will, follow with me tonight or today, and I'm gonna try to, if I can, put this together in lieu of Christmas and the guilt that so many people feel about Christmas and what they do to try to make up for a year's worth of toxicness, if you will, by making up for it one day out of the year, which is ludicrous, to be honest with you. It doesn't change a thing. It just, all it does is exacerbate it, make it worse. But here's some things that I want to talk about tonight, and I want you to get this from a different perspective. The notes that I'm going to be reading from is from a study called The Follower, Being a Follower. And I think this is one of the things that many people during the holidays have forgotten, that it gets so chaotic and we get so caught up with everything that, you know, things are not good right now in a lot of different ways across the country, across the world. Christendom has never been under attack more than it has been under this administration, and I'm talking about the Biden administration, and I'm talking about the fact that they have done nothing but put down Christians and anything that has to do with Christianity and anything that has to do with morals. And they have basically blown all of those things up. And it's more toxic today than it was even 6 years ago when Trump took over. And now, why am I bringing that in? Well, I'm bringing that in because we're in a condition right now where I believe there is such a delicate balance between the right and wrong thing to do in the world today that we need to be very, very careful about how we see things. Even the situation in the Ukraine, where Putin came out today, when I'm recording this, which is about 2 days before Christmas. I'm doing it so that, because everybody's going to be gone. And I'm doing it on purpose because of the fact that Putin came out to say that he is going to have a direct conflict with the Americas if we do not de-escalate our helping of the Ukraine. And as we speak, there are a huge amount of forces and a huge amount of weaponry being put together in Belarus to not only invade, but to totally take over the country of Ukraine. And there's going to be some serious consequences if we're in a hot war with that. And consequences not only for America, but for Ukraine and for the world if we're not careful. Because there's some ugly stuff coming down the pipe, and I don't think a lot of people really realize that. Now, tonight, in lieu of that, we're going to take a look at this from the prodigal son's older brother's viewpoint, if you will. Follow with me now. The guy that we're talking about has two sons. In fact, you know what? Let's read it. Let's go ahead and read it through the beginning of it. Chapter 15. Verse 11 through 32, I think it is. Yeah, 32. And I'm going to read this out of the red letter edition of the New King James. And just see what your take is on this. In lieu of what I've just told you, so that you can understand what's happening here. Again, Jesus is addressing the Pharisees and Sadducees. But more to the point, he's really addressing them when the father is speaking to the older sons. We'll catch that in just a moment. Let's see if I've got my numbers correct. Yeah, 11 through 32. It said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided them his livelihood. In other words, everything that he owned, everything. That was land, property, everything, money, everything. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. That's why I went to the New King James. Prodigal living. Interesting term. Prodigal living. Let me see if I can find that real quick and give you the definition of that. I can't give you the exact, but prodigal living, they said, wasted it on, as the prodigal son's older brother would say, on prostitutes. It wasn't necessarily that. It was just wild living, is what it amounted to. It really meant he just kind of did whatever he felt like doing because this young man had not learned how to deal with wealth. The father had, and he did it for his sons, but the fact is, this is how it came out. In verse 14, he says, and when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And when he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, this is very important. He joined himself to a citizen of that country. This man was not a Jew. He was a Gentile. How do we know that? Because he raised pigs. Absolutely, totally forbidden for Jews to eat anything that came from a pig. Anything. Doesn't matter what else. Touching it made you unclean. But look what he said. He joined himself to sit in the country, and he sent him out into the fields to feed swine. Now, why do you think this man told him he wanted him to go out and feed the pigs? He didn't want to hire the guy. Bottom line was, he didn't want to hire the guy because he knew he was a Jew. He thought that he would not take the job, but he did. And so he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. In other words, he was feeding them, throwing the buckets of pods, and what they were carob pods. Carob, which is cocoa, and they're small seeds. You've seen cocoa seeds, and the thing that's interesting about them is that they were long and flat, and the seeds were lined up in a straight line, and they would rip them open, and they would pop out when they were ripe, and they would just pop out. And these carob pods were long and wide, and they were nasty because they were full of strings, like peas. Sometimes when you eat peas and they're stringy, but there were hundreds of strings in this, and no nourishment whatsoever. But the pigs ate them; they loved them because they'd eat anything. But the fact is that he said he couldn't even get any of it because no one gave him any of them. But then all of a sudden he came to himself and he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger?" Of course, that's probably a little pent up, but the fact is there was a famine, and it's getting pretty ugly, especially when we're finding even in our own city here that there's things that are not available anymore, or at least not all of the time, because of the fact that there is a very big-time problem with our vegetables and other things that are normally very easy to get, but now we can't afford them, or we can't even get them, and we're finding that happen. That's why I wanted to talk about what's happening in America today and here, and what's happening for a century. Then he goes on, he says, "And I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you." And all of a sudden he got religious again. Isn't it funny how we do that? "And I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." This, as I explained Sunday, is a doulos. Doulos, D-O-U-L-O-S. L-O-S, doulos. And a doulos is a hired servant. In other words, he lives on the property. He has a room, place for his family to be raised, but he works every day for the owner, who would be his father, and he would pay him a stipend. He would not pay him a living wage because he's living with him, but he would pay him something. So he had some sort of freedom. He could buy what he wanted on the side. Now, he saw this as an advantage because he said he thought he could be able to get away, if you will, with doing that. Follow me with this now. And there arose and came to his father, and when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Now, this is interesting because remember what I said Sunday. If you didn't see it, you might want to rewatch and listen to it. That in those days, when you were the patriarch is the one, we learned this from Rabbi, has the long sleeves that go down over his wrists, the sleeves. Mostly everyone else would have them cut up here by the shoulder, which indicated that they were hirelings or they were not the patriarch, not the guy, okay? He had it all the way down to here and a long robe that would cover all the way down over his ankles. It was in Jewish tradition very, very inappropriate to raise your robe above your ankles because it showed your ankles, and that was inappropriate. In fact, there was a punishment for that. But the point was, is the reason why the father did this is why it's so important, is that he pulled it up so that everyone around looked at him running, which, by the way, if you ran in a Jewish town like this, there's only two reasons to run. One, there's a fire. Number two, you stole something, so you had to get away. And so that's why that would happen. And then all eyes would be on the father, which was taking all of the, if you will, persecution for what his son had done before he had left, because he went to all of his friends and demanded to have him all of his bills paid, which for some would have been quite a burden because not everybody had money at that time to do that. Some would do it with animals, which means that they would have to have them be born, grow them a while, and then they would raise them a while, and then give them to the father as payment for whatever it was he borrowed. My point that I'm making is that here he did everything exactly the wrong way for a purpose to take the shame off of his son so that they would look at him and not the son and not lavish more shame on him. Now, follow with me now as we get to the crux of this. And he rose and came to his father, and in verse 21, and the son said to him, Father, I have sinned. His well-rehearsed lines, he had sinned and from heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants who followed him, because that's what you do when the boss runs, you run. And so they ran after him. Bring out the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. So first of all, he was pretty much naked, which meant that he has exposed himself, and that means that he was improperly dressed in public, and the father came and says, well, fix that. So he took care of that. And then he said to them, before they got back to the compound, back to the house, back to the place that they were at, he says, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this is my son who was dead and is alive again, and is lost and is found, and he began to be merry. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We're going to talk about the older son. Follow with me now. Now the older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. Well, this guy had a lot of property, so he was far enough away that it took a while for him to get to earshot, if you will, of the house, and they were having a party, and the boombox was going, and the people were hollering and screaming, and they were making merry. All right, here he is. So he called out to one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come because he has received him safe and sound. Your father has killed the fatted calf. But this made him mad. made him angry. And he would not go in. Therefore, his father, this is another thing, this would not happen in first century under these conditions. It would not happen, period. The father would not come out to him. He would have his servant, probably the biggest, baddest one they had, go out and get his son and drag his fanny in. It wouldn't happen this way. I'm just saying, this is how this looks. Think about this for a moment. This is just totally opposite of the way things should be. Again, Jesus speaking to the Pharisees and Sadducees, making a point to them about what it should look like when someone is not in the fold. In other words, someone has walked away from the church or walked away from Judaism or whatever the case may be. This is exactly what he's saying. Why didn't you do these things? He's shaming them. Think about that. But now the older brother's involved. Now, so he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years, boo-hoo, these many years I've been serving you. And he's really not saying I'm serving you. He says, I've been a slave to you. Are you hearing me? I've been a slave to you. I've never transgressed your commandments. In other words, I've kept the law. Boy, did the Pharisees and Sadducees say, oh yeah, all 2,100 and some odd laws on the books, and they kept every one of them. Not so much, just saying. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as a son of yours came, oh, now he's not my brother anymore. See, he did what the mentality was of the Jewish nation at that time. Basically, he just totally, out of here, gone, you're done. You don't exist, you're dead to me. I don't know if I've told you the story. We had an associate pastor here who married a Jewish woman. And because she became a Christian and gave her heart to Jesus, the father and the mother of his wife, they had a funeral for her. Nobody in the box, but a full-blown funeral in which they took the box out to a cemetery and buried it. It basically said, you're not part of us anymore. Yeah, it happens all the time. This is very common. It's one reason. I dated a Jewish girl. I know for a fact her dad did not want to meet me. Didn't want to talk to me. Why? Because I was not a Jew. Oh, I know. You could have been converted. No, I was a Christian at the time. In fact, I brought her to church. And the trouble was, as I've been bringing her to church, it pretty well freaked her out. Just saying. Anyway, another thing altogether. Wasn't the synagogue, all I can say. And he says, but as soon as your son of yours came, who's devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. Okay, he just told him, he said, everything I own is yours. Everything that I have now is already yours. Think about that. It's not right that you should make merry and be glad for your brother. It said, it is right that we should make merry and be glad for your brother who was dead is alive again, and who was lost is found. Now, saying all of that to say this is that many of us have difficulty dealing with the things that are happening within the confines of the family, and to take note that in this case is no different. So I'm not going to take and give you facts and Jewish tradition and all that other things. We're going to take a look at this from the older son's background. This is what this study says, and I want to throw that out there so we can discuss it a little bit. He said, so here's a translation of this particular story. He says, this guy had two sons. He gives these two sons all they could ever ask for. One of the sons is super responsible and has been given, and with all he's been given, and the other son goes on a bender. In other words, he's just a doofus. And he spends the money, squanders his property, and just the party's a little too hard. He ends up showing up at his father's house once again saying something that's along the lines of, I messed up, I'm not worthy of you take me back. But the father isn't having it. He's not mad at his son. In fact, he's so pumped up that he's home, he throws an epic welcome for him. in a party for him. He does. The other son, though, at this point, pretty much over his brother's antics. He's done with him. He's pretty well cast him to the side and roadkill, if you will. And he's off kicking rocks in the corner and whining to his dad, "Why are you being so good to him? He messed up, and I've always been good to you. You've never thrown a party for me. You've never done anything for my friends." To which the father replies, "Kid, you don't get it. You're always with me. You're always going to be here. I know that." And he says, "You've got access to anything I own, and you know that." He tells him that straight up. And we have gone to Target last week and picked out your party invitations if you wanted to. We could have done all this stuff. He says, "I don't understand. Your brother was lost and now he's found. Quit fussing, man, and, get the piñata. Let's have a party." He couldn't get it. He didn't get it at all. This is clearly a story about how God loves to lavish on those who go from lost to found. It's a big deal. Remember in the first story, the finding of one sheep out of 100, and the second story of finding one coin out of 10, that there was said there would be greater rejoicing in heaven for one who has repented. One guy. Whole world, one guy. Greater party going on than all the rejoicing that we've gone over these things that we've lost. Now, Jesus basically said, in this story, he says, "I want you back. I don't care what the price is." This is what I pray for our church and our body and the church as a whole, because the world is telling them and everyone that will listen, "I hate Christianity. I hate it. I hate people of faith." The President of the United States, Joe Biden, said that he said that those that follow Trump, for instance, that they're a threat to America. That's BS. There's no truth to that at all. You know why? Is because the people that are the most faith-based are the people that were following Trump as a general rule. 75% of them were Christian, evangelical, if you will, people of faith, even people of faith on the other side. But my problem with all of that is this. Many people don't think for one moment, they don't have one problem hating people because somebody in authority says to. Think about that for a minute. This is what's going on here. He said, these are one of the things that I need to understand, is that we need to go with a different direction. I just can't understand why people cannot get it that God is greater, bigger, more powerful than anything we could ever fabricate or ever come up with. And yet we have trouble with this dialogue of the older brother. Now, the last part of the story, or the dialogue that we just talked about, is the attitude of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law at that time. They had the same view of sinners as the older brother did. In other words, throw them to the side. We don't give a rip about them. Jesus had a different story. Remember now, let's set the stage. 400 years before Jesus showed up on the scene, God had not spoken to the Jews. 400 years. That's basically probably about maybe 6 generations. Why do I say that? Because we were only guaranteed 70 years. So 400 years divided by 7 is about 4.5. 4.75 or something like that. So the thought that I'm saying is that there's about 4 to 5 generations of people that have gone through that had not heard from God in a long time. And unfortunately here in America, that's kind of the way things are looking right now. Right now, this is the first time in America's history that, number one, we're not procreating at a rate to make up for those that are dying, especially with the pandemic. Number two, that the people of faith is on the decline, believe it or not. And I want to tell you something. It's time for us to stand up and start thinking about what that really means. Now, they believed that sin deserved a punishment. They believed that sin deserved a punishment. A lot of Christians today believe the same thing. But they don't believe it in the way that Jesus was teaching it. You see, the thing is that what we have done is we try to make up for it. What I was talking about in Christmas and understanding what Christmas is about, trying to make up with that gift or with that thought or with that purpose or that thing or whatever. My adopted daughter is struggling with some stuff that her mom had sent her. And I say that because it's obvious that it bothers her. Why? Because, again, trying to make up for something that they feel guilt for in the past. That is not how God works. That is not how God works today. And it's never how God is going to work. Think about that. Now, so let's take a little closer look at this kingdom that the older brother refused to enter into, basically. He did not want to bury the hatchet. He did not want to look past the faults, saying, "Oh, I'm so glad that he's alive and well," and la la la. Well, he didn't want none of that. So one of these things that we need to understand. Now, I said, look at these. He said to his dad, he said, "Look at these many years I served you. I never disobeyed your command, and you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends." One translation actually says this: "I've been slaving for you as if I didn't have a choice to leave himself," as if he didn't leave, he didn't have a choice. And God isn't asking us to operate as slaves. That's actually the opposite of what the gospel message speaks to. Jesus came to save us out of slavery from sin and not to secure us into slavery again. 2 times in Scripture in the Gospels, he said, do not go back and put yourself in chains. Our president said that, and it was the wrong way he said it. Don't put yourself back into chains. Don't go back into bondage, because that is not how Jesus brings the gospel to the people. Now, here's something that I think is really interesting. We need to check ourselves. We need to take a look at what this means. Now, what are the things in your life, or the things I should say, in your, the things that you've seen that have caused you pain that you keep revisiting? This young lady that has a story in here that I just read through was talking about how she hated her older brother because he became a drug addict, and he was in and out of rehab, and he would come home for a while and steal stuff and go right back into the same thing again, never really recovered. I don't know how many of you that are listening to me today have the same situation going on right now. And I want to tell you something. It's the message that God has given me for Christmas Eve, tomorrow evening, as we're speaking, is that it's very interesting to me. And you won't be able to hear this until Wednesday, so I ain't giving away the farm for Saturday night. But the thing is that there is absolutely, listen carefully what I'm about to say, there is absolutely nothing you can do to change the circumstances of what's happened in the past. Nothing. And believe me, I've seen people try. I've seen the ridiculous to the exotic to all kinds of things that people have tried to fix the past and cover up mistakes that have happened in their lives. There's nothing you can do to do that. But there is somebody who can. There's really somebody who can. His name is Jesus. He can actually make something happen where that couldn't happen before. And when you get to the place where you give up your rights to an outcome, listen carefully what I'm saying. You give up your rights to an outcome and give them to Jesus, really give them to Him. You know what's going to happen? You will have all of that turnaround right before your eyes. The prodigal son is an excellent, excellent example. Now, let me tell you that some of us are in danger of pride. Some of us are in danger of wandering in the zone, if you will, out in the middle of nowhere, and letting these things conquer you when Jesus said, "Come unto me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden." That kind of burden that we're talking about is why Jesus was born on Christmas. If you're a good Jew, he was conceived in Christmas, and sometime in June or July came to the planet, as many Orthodox Jews believe, especially if you deal with the Jewish calendar. I know that sounds confusing, but the fact that the Jewish calendar and the Roman calendar are quite opposite in a lot of different things. But we need to understand that the concept here is still a concept. The concept is that you cannot fix stuff in the past by trying to lavish someone with something that they know, and even you know, is nothing but smoke screens, mirrors, and distraction. The only way that you can see these things fixed is having Jesus to accept the fact that we need to learn how to love like Jesus did and stop trying to love like the world does. The world's tried everything. They know how to manipulate. They know how to make all the glitz and glamour and all the cool stuff happen. But the fact is that this is one of the biggest challenges of our lives, is to learn to love like Jesus, so that the peace of God may be ours, so that we might be part of a bigger picture. Now, this young lady was saying that it took her years to accept and love her brother again, even though he messed up all the time. Have you ever thought about that? There's a difference between exercising proper boundaries with someone. And what do I mean by that? Proper boundaries, in other words, here's the deal. This will get you crazy, but think about it. In other words, you've been burned by someone. They've continually to do the same things they've always done. They're not changing. But Jesus says, I still need to love them. How does that work? Loving someone because of who they are, because of their connection with you, doesn't mean that you have to give up everything and let them beat you across the mouth. That's not how it works. But loving someone and giving them the boundaries that they need and respect and space, that is how we make these things happen. You have to be in a place where you allow God to do what he needs to do in your life. And the thing that's fascinating about this story is that the oldest brother was angry, not that his younger brother was home, but that his dad was throwing a party for him. That is the epitome of jealousy. That's the epitome of stupidity. Because what you've done is you have let someone else, careful, now follow what I'm saying. You've put someone else on the throne of your heart instead of Jesus. In other words, I'm now angry at my father, so I put my brother here in the prodigal son, younger brother, in place because I'm angry at him. The thing is, you should be angry with yourself that you've allowed that to happen, because you cannot change the past. You cannot fix it by lavishing something on someone once a year, thinking that will cover up for all the stupidity of the last several. We need to understand that God is the only arbiter of real love. He's the only one that can bring real love into focus for you, so that as you begin to become focused on him, that love overlooks all of the stupidity that you see, that disgusts you and causes you pain. The thing is that loving people for who they are, despite of their screw-ups, is when you begin to gain ground in the atmosphere that God has provided for us. We go through the whole situation with the candles and all the other stuff that we done for the weeks up to Jesus' birth. And I think that's all great and that's all wonderful, but the fact is that there is no substitute, nothing. No one thing that we can do that will keep us from knowing that Jesus is the reason for the season. He's it. He's everything. He's all that there can be. Now, with all of that said, this final thought is, here's some things that we just need to remember. In verse 28, the eldest brother was angry and wouldn't go inside. But the next line reads like this. He said, his father came out and entreated him. His father came out to him. In other words, what they would not do in the first century, that would have never happened. This is what's so confounding to people. We read this in the West and we don't get it. The father would have never came out of the house to come get the older brother. He would have not done that. Why? Because he would have sent someone a whole lot bigger than he was to come and drag his fanny in. That's what would have happened. Jesus is saying, because of my love for that person, I'm going to go to them. See the difference? I'm going to reach out to them. I'm going to go out to them. This would have, he would have never come out. He would have sent a servant in his behalf, and probably the biggest, baddest one he had. Just saying. No matter how big the son was, he would have probably been, escorted to the father. The other thing that I think is interesting, this is what is being said as we come to the end of this message. God himself became a human and entered into the world to rescue you. Yeah, just you. He didn't send in the practice team. He didn't send in somebody who could take care of business. He didn't send Moses or Elijah. He certainly didn't. He didn't bring Enoch. What did he do? He came himself. And why did he do that? Because he loved you that much. That's the story. That's the whole line here. This is the whole reason why the prodigal is such an important story to understand. If you understand it in the cultural, you'll understand it in the spiritual. Because once you understand in the cultural, everything that he did was opposite of what culture said to do. It just is. And everything that Jesus did is opposite of what the spiritual man at that time would have done. So saying all of that to say this, sometimes we need to understand that everything that we do is not based on rewards. Everything we do is based on love. Everything and everywhere we go should be based on love, not on what we can get from it, even though many still seem to think that's the thing to do. Just remember, you can't outperform God. Remember that you'll never be able to do enough to win something from him, because everything he has is yours, and he'll come to you to prove this point. So tonight, I hope that you found something interesting to chew on this week as we approach the new year and all the other stuff that goes with it. And I know that it seems like this 45 to 50 minutes has gone quite fast, but that's kind of how it goes this is kind of how we roll. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May his light shine upon you. And everywhere you go, no matter where it is, leave a blessing so that God can increase it. Remember, you can't do anything, and you can't take it back. Have a great holiday. Get some rest if you can. If not, go back to doing whatever you got to do to make ends meet. And remember, he'll meet your needs wherever you're at. In Jesus' name, amen. See you next week. Lighthouse Living Room, out for the week.